Good afternoon. My name is Barry O'Dwyer and I'm working at the Centre for Energy, Climate and Marine at University College Cork in Ireland. In this role, I lead the development and manage Climate Ireland, which is recognised as Ireland's climate, as Ireland's national adaptation platform. And Climate Ireland directly supports our local and sectoral decision makers in Ireland in planning for climate change adaptation. If you want to find out more about Climate Ireland, please visit www.climateireland.ie. In advance of the upcoming K for CAP VKE entitled Ensuring Platforms Agility in order to meet evolving user needs, I'm delighted to present you with an overview of the topic and to inform discussions on the day itself. I think as providers of adaptation platforms or services, we are all very clear on the importance of meeting the needs of our users. And I think it's also important that we start to consider how the needs of our users is evolving as they progress in their adaptation journeys, amongst others. So to get started, I think it's really important that as providers of adaptation platforms, we situate ourselves within the wider climate services landscape itself. In this slide, you can see the range of types of climate services that are available. On the left-hand side, with those services primarily associated with presenting climate change information, such as Earth observation data and climate modelling. And these services tend to operate at relatively large spatial scales, global and international scales, and they're dominated by natural systems themselves. On the right-hand side, we have services that are designed to support decision making, and these services include adaptation services and services in support of climate change action. They're more focused on employing climate change information to develop vulnerability information, for example, and they are associated with developing decision making frameworks and supports that allow users to employ climate change information within their own decision making itself. A key challenge for these services is in how we move from what's essentially useful information, such as climate change information, into more usable information that directly addresses the decision making context of our users. To overcome this challenge, we've a number of tasks when developing platforms. We have to first of all understand how our users perceive the information and the importance of that information to their decision making. We also have to consider their ability to actually be able to deploy that information within their decision making itself. We have to think about how the knowledge we provide interplays with other kinds of knowledge that's currently being employed by our users. And this in turn informs us how we might tailor that information to make it more fit for purpose for their needs. So I think this is one of the key challenges that we all face as providers of adaptation platforms. But we also have to think about as climate change and adaptation develops the other requirements that our users will have. And in terms of the actual users themselves, as adaptation platforms, we have to understand that users' experience evolves. Here I show a typical adaptation planning cycle. In this case, this is based on the planning cycle that Irish local authorities use in the development of their adaptation plans. I'm sure you're all quite familiar with such a five-step iterative process to support the development of adaptation plans. In Ireland particularly, we're now starting to see that, well, it is an iterative cycle, and it goes through a number of different stages, and we have to be able to support our users through each of these stages and with different type of information. We have iterations of adaptation planning in support of awareness raising. This awareness raising then leads into further iterations in support of planning and then implementation, and this will be followed by evaluation, etc. So as the developers of climate adaptation platforms, we have to understand that we can't stay still. We have to evolve with our users' experience of doing adaptation, their actual capacity to employ the information that we make available to them. And we have to be able to evolve in line with these capacities to produce more sophisticated decision-making supports and tools. In addition to the evolving experience of our users, we also have to be aware of the evolving information base on which climate change adaptation is undertaken. A key part of this is obviously the science, the climate change information that's made available through the IPCC and subsequently downscaled at a national basis. We have to be able to keep abreast of the most up-to-date climate change and adaptation science, and this includes not only the information but also the concepts that underlie the use of this information in decision making. An example here I would use would be around definitions of vulnerability and risk, and particularly the updated definitions of risks made available through AOR5 compared to AOR4. We also have to think about the evolving policy landscape, which is obviously important to our users. And the policy landscape is changing on a continual basis, both nationally and internationally. And I think a good example of this is the publication of the EU Green Deal and also the publication of the forthcoming EU adaptation strategies. This will require considerable updates to our adaptation platforms and the content contained within. We also have to be able to expect to reflect the users, the experience of our users in implementing adaptation itself. So we have to be able to tell our user stories, and we have to be able to reflect their journeys in adaptation itself through case studies, etc. And this is really essential in ensuring that adaptation platforms remains a user's platform itself. I think a good example of this is in terms of local scale planning for climate change adaptation in Ireland. In Ireland, all of Ireland's local authorities are required to develop local adaptation strategies by our National Adaptation Framework, which was published in 2018. On the basis of this framework, our local authorities published their first iteration of adaptation strategies in September 2019, and these will be further iterated in 2024. All of the strategies followed the local authority adaptation strategy development guidelines that were developed by the Climate Ireland team itself. And we can see the influence of Climate Ireland in the strategies themselves and how it's cited in nearly all the strategies, and particularly in relation to the local authority adaptation support wizard that we provide through Climate Ireland, in addition to the projection and information provided through Climate Ireland also. One of the key things around this first iteration of adaptation strategies that was essentially focused on awareness raising and starting to kickstart planning for adaptation in Ireland at the local scale. The information employed was generally based on national climate change information, on national scale statements around projected changes in variables such as precipitation, temperature, sea level rise, etc. However, this development of this first iteration of strategies increased our users' capacity considerably in terms of their ability to employ information, and particularly climate information made available through Climate Ireland itself. So we wanted to explore this to start to understand how our user needs had evolved as a result of this initial development and the awareness that it had raised around our local authorities in terms of requirements for adaptation decision making. So we held a workshop as part of the second International Climate Change Adaptation Platform meeting, which was held in Dublin in October 2019. As part of this meeting, the workshop itself focused on assessing our evolving user requirements. And to do this, we looked at the expectations of our users and then rated them against the information provided by the range of platforms that were in attendance at the meeting itself. And I'm showing the raw results here that were produced at the meeting itself, but I think we can make that a bit more legible in this way. So the left-hand column shows the expectations that were identified by our users, and the top row shows the individual platforms that were in attendance at the meeting. Green obviously means the expectation was fully met around the provision of that particular information or tool, etc. Yellow means the platform had gone some way to meeting that requirement, whereas red means the platform itself didn't meet that requirement. And so you can see here in terms of Climate Ireland how it is currently meeting the different requirements cited by our users. So what is really interesting about this workshop was how our users' expectations had changed in terms of what a platform should be providing them. As I said, the first round of adaptation strategies were for the most part developed on national scale statements around climate change information, but our users started to take a more sophisticated approach to planning for climate change adaptation itself. They expect platforms to now provide them with information support of risk assessment, such as data on infrastructure, economic data, demographic data, land use data, and also integrated risk mapping data. They also showed that they had increased their understanding of climate projection data and requested the climate projection data be provided with threshold values to allow them better understand thresholds at which adverse impacts might be felt. They also wanted to see more detailed case studies rather than just inspirational stories, case studies that showed how to develop and implement particular and specific adaptation measures, and they felt that this would support them in implementing such measures in their own authorities. In addition to the evolving user capacity and experience, the increasing amount of information available to users, we also have to consider technology developments, and I think understand that on a daily basis our users are accessing industry standard websites and their expectations are developed on this basis. So we have to understand that technology is developing at an unprecedented rate, and I think we can see that how we've moved from being essentially desktop based in 2010 to now users wanting platforms that are responsive, that can be viewed on smartphones, on tablets and on desktop PCs, and all work seamlessly. This has large implications for front-end and back-end technologies employed by our platforms and the development of these. And there's significant resource requirements in terms of IT and human resource to overcome these challenges and keep up to date with essentially industry standard web development technologies. I think Climate Ireland and the technical evolution of Climate Ireland provides another example of how we have had to develop in line with our user requirements for technical advances. Initially, as you can see on the left-hand side, Climate Ireland was developed in 2010 based on standard web technologies, such as HTML, CSS, through what is now the fourth iteration on the right-hand side of the platform. We've significantly developed Climate Ireland. It's now based on a user-centered design with a fully responsive interface, but also modern web development technologies such as Angular JS. It's underpinned by a service-oriented architecture that allows us both portability and expandability. So to ensure that our users get the experience that they expect from a website more generally. So it's essential that we keep up to date with the technical requirements of our users, and this is challenging. So how do we start to meet this challenge? Well, it's clear that there's a really wide range of impacts, vulnerability and adaptation knowledge, and this knowledge has improved significantly. And the challenges we face as platforms is to transform this data in a way that is relevant, easy to understand and use, credible and robust. And this has to be undertaken in the context of what our users want now and what they will want into the future. So how do we address this challenge? Well, we have to understand the role that knowledge and data provided by our platforms play and can play in supporting users to advance adaptation. We have to understand why and how the information provided by platforms is and could be used by decision makers themselves. We also have to understand our users' capacity both now and in the future, and to employ climate and adaptation information in their own decision-making processes. We have to keep abreast and incorporate increasing quantities of information and data as and when it becomes available. An example of that would be the release of IPCC Hour 6. And we have to keep up to date with evolving technologies and associated user requirements and expectations. And this is particularly important because many users, if they feel it's an old website, they will consider the information contained on that website to also be old and out of date. So to conclude, ensuring a platform's agility to meet evolving user needs is a challenge for all platform developers. And that's why through the K for CAP VKE3, ensuring platforms agility in order to meet evolving user needs, we seek to explore the issue of how do we retain relevance to our users. And as part of the VKE, we want to explore the challenges and opportunities posed by trying to retain relevance to our users across all the different areas, and identify the best approaches to ensure that climate adaptation platforms remain relevant in terms of evolving user needs, but also new users, and in an ever-changing world in terms of technology, data collation, and interpretation and provision. So I really look forward to meeting with you all to discuss this further at the upcoming VKE3. And if you want more information on either K for CAP itself or the upcoming Virtual Knowledge Exchange, you can find it at the web address provided here. Thank you.